Scrutiny Committee meeting. Do you have any apologies for absence?
No, convener.
Any declarations of interest from members? Can I declare an interest in item 7, particularly Danny Cab? I attend their board meetings in an observer capacity. And I'll still be able to take part in the proceedings. Thank you. Agenda item 3, minutes for the meeting held on the 7th of October. I agree them as a 3-minute. Any questions arising from it? Thank you. Takes us to agenda item 4, which is a further report requested by the committee on Sacro Youth Justice Service. Robert, I believe you're taking this one.
Thanks, Chair. At the last meeting, a report was presented and there was some further questions about the overall funding for Sacro, the contributions that Sacro gets from the Scottish Government, and some questions around the other authorities that were involved with Sacro. So the report sets out what we've been able to discover, and it details the level of funding that comes from the Scottish Government and the contributions made by the other local authorities. In future, when we have the report that was presented at the last committee, it will include the same information that is presented here today. My colleague Leslie James is on the call and she may be able to provide some further information if there's any questions on the report.
Thanks, Robert. Any questions on the report? Councillor McCluskey.
Yes, convener, and there is a wee bit more detail here, and it's certainly far better than the last bit. So it explains how the funding comes about. However, it says that no other service does similar work, and it says none. But our youth teams and CLD deal with some of the more difficult children that's caused some problems, and we now have the counsellors that were waiting in a report on update and how it's gone. I've heard some concerns about that, but in our schools who should be working with people with social problems and that as well. So seeing how these other, when we say that there's nothing anybody else doing this, means that, you know, it would be such a loss. But we have got other things that do similar types of support and counselling, have we not?
We do, but this is actually quite a specific service. Maybe ask Gail McIntyre to come in and just explain a little bit further, Councillor McCluskey.
That's what I'm saying about the report. It may be simple once Gail explains it, but just in the reading for the last report and this report, it's no clear what is the difference from what it does for what community education or what school counsellors or the support we give to other children. That's my key.
Yep, thank you. I think there are a wide range of different types of family supports and supports available for young people, so we absolutely recognise that. The difference with Sacro is that we have staff trained specifically in youth justice work, so are able to deliver specific interventions looking at the offending and the issues underlying the offending behaviour. So they're also got access to things like structured risk assessment tools to help them understand how worried we are and what type of support should be in place. They're also trained in restorative justice approaches and are recognised as a key provider of that nationally. So I think it's one of a range of different providers, but with some specific specialist knowledge around youth justice service delivery.
For the funding we put in, how many people, you know, it tells us the amount of children in this one that that comes before us, 50 others, but 53 cases we dealt with last year. However, how many people are actually working with them, and try to gauge that. If we look at the value for money and say, well, what we're added to, what the government puts in and that, we've got X amount of folk in a team that are all working to do that, you could see the value. And it's just like, you know, where if we, because some of the money is going to training, and what I'm trying to say is, if we employed a couple of local, our own people and give them that training, how does one compare? How does apples compare with pears, right? Are we getting a whole lot more for that money rather than we're trying to get comparison to what we could be doing by training a couple of people up to do that within children's services? That simplifies the question.
Yeah, we did used to have more youth justice provision within children's services, but the salary and qualifications for the staff that were delivering that is higher than what SACRO are providing. So their staff costs and service delivery is lower than what we were paying previously. And I think in terms of the scope or the reach of the service, SACRO have been involved in delivering group work programmes. They've previously supported schools, worked with CLD, so that's something that they can do, and obviously the pandemic over the last 20 months or so has had a real impact on that. But I know at the moment there's discussions underway in schools with community-based police officers as well around how we could do some group work and, as I said, spread the reach of the service. So really keen to be creative and to offer as wide a range of services as possible and work alongside all of our partner agencies as well.
Convener, I'm satisfied with that response, and if that had been conveyed in what I'm saying as a report, that this is the type of work that SAPRA do, linked with all these services and that, I wouldn't maybe have to have asked the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McCluggey. Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Convener. Gail, page 19, in the conclusion 7.1, it says we've been in discussions have already taken place in this financial year 21 to 22 about increasing the target from 50 to 80. Could you give us a progress on that, Gail, please?
Yes, so what we've been trying to do is just to review all the young people that are currently working with the service, and again review what were we hoping to achieve, how's that progressing, and are we reaching the outcomes, so that we're able then to free up capacity to deliver more services. So we are, I couldn't give you an exact number today, but that's definitely what we are aiming to do. And we're also linked to that same section. We've varied the criteria a bit so that, as well as early intervention, they're also supporting with higher risk young people, so that they are now involved in working with higher risk young people, and also with delivering court support to young people over 16. So their remit has already broadened, and it's definitely much more responsive to what we need as a children's service.
Thanks, Gail. So working with the 16 to 17-year-olds, for example, will add to that, will mean that we're caring for more than 50. We're looking after more than 50 then, if we bring them into play.
Yes.
Gail, can I have a follow-up question on that same topic? That increased from 50 to 80, will that be achievable within your current funding allocation?
That's what our expectation has been with our discussions with the provider. So again, it's about targeting the support to those who need it most, making it time limited for earlier intervention cases. So that is what the ask has been. We have provided some level of administrative support to SACRO linked to their early and effective intervention group. So we've basically targeted that resource into frontline service delivery. So SACRO are confident that they can deliver what we're asking within the existing budget.
Thanks, Gail. Any other questions to Gail?
Yeah, can I just ask Gail? I was reading the background here, Gail, and I was quite amazed at the amount or the disparity between female and male. basically 20% in 18-19 down to roughly 12% in 2021. I don't know how that compares to the overall figures of people who are maybe going through the system and things, or is there alternatives available for females, or is this more geared, the service you provide more geared to males?
I think that nationally statistics would say that young males are more actively involved in offending and antisocial behaviour than females, so our statistics do confirm that. I think in terms of the service, I think the service are geared up to meet the needs of both male and female. So if we do have those referrals, each individual programme of work is tailor-made to that young person. So the presenting needs, the risks, the types of offences or antisocial behaviour. So it'll be very much geared to individuals.
Thank you.
Councillor Balfour.
Thanks, Convener. I've just got a few quick questions.
You're mute, Councillor Balfour.
Is that working now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I've been getting some increased complaints about youth disorder in my own area. I'm quite sure other councillors are getting the same. What can you do to try and counteract these increases?
I think if we're made aware of youth disorder in certain areas, we can look at a targeted approach. So SACRO have been involved in alongside CLD in terms of community outreach. So trying to target young people that are involved in those types of behaviour. So that's again linking in with the community safety team and looking at what we could do collectively in terms of the services that are around and the young people that are involved in that.
Okay. Do you think that possibly referrals should be made earlier?
We do try and get referrals as soon as possible. So we do have an early and effective intervention group. So basically, any time a child or young person comes to the attention of the police, even if it's the first time they've done that, police can make a referral into that group, and SACRO are able to respond quickly and pick up referrals. So we try our best to pick up referrals as quickly as possible. And that group meets every 2 weeks.
Okay. I'm just kind of thinking about once the young person's been through the process, how effective is that, and what's the kind of rates of reoffending?
At the moment, I can't unfortunately provide rates of reoffending for young people that have been involved in SACRO, so we've not got that data collated. So that's certainly something that we could build into our data for future, so that we're able to provide that to you. What we do in terms of evaluation, we look at the young person and their well-being and scoring in different areas of their life. So we look at that at the start, during intervention and after intervention. And after intervention, every young person has said that they're feeling more confident, they've got more self-esteem, they're avoiding offending or negative behaviour. But that's based on self-report, that they are feeling better and more confident. But what we need to do is match that up with any further offending, and we will be able to do that, build in a system to track that.
Okay. If there is any reoffending, is there anything done differently? Is it more intensive, or what do you do differently to try and prevent any further reoffending?
So SACRO is our early intervention service, but we have, as I mentioned earlier, part of that service we've now commissioned to work with higher risk young people. And we also have one full-time youth justice social worker within children's services as well. So they, I'd say, are more experienced and have undertaken more training. So they are trained in structured risk assessment tools, recognised intervention programmes. So they will deliver more intensive work over a longer period of time, and the focus will be different as well. So rather than the intervention per se. It will be around the issues underlying the behaviour. For example, if alcohol or substance misuse is an issue, how do we address that? If there's issues around mental health and well-being, how can we address that to reduce the impact on the offending? So we do work in a different way, so a more intensive, more focused way, with staff with more experience and training in that area.
Okay, just one final wee question. It mentions on page 20 court support. Can you give a wee bit further information on what that involves?
Yes, so the court support is if a young person over 16 is not subject to a supervision order, so they're not already open to social work, or they're not in a legal order with social work, and they committed an offence and they've been held in custody overnight, for instance, they might then be liberated with an undertaking to appear in court. So they have very quickly escalated to the adult justice system, but are still very young and inexperienced in that area. So what we try and do is pick those referrals up immediately from court so that we can speak to the young person about their needs, speak to their family, make sure they get legal advice, talk to them about safety planning, such as what behaviours led to that incident. Is there things that need to be done differently, like you're avoiding drinking, you're not going to be involved with those peers, you're not going to be out in that community. So really just talking about risk management, safety planning, legal advice and any support that they may need.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that.
Any further questions? Okay, can I take you to page 18, recommendation 2.11? Do you agree with that recommendation?
Agreed.
Gail, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you.
Takes us to agenda item 5, performing report from Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. David Sharp, I believe you're taking this one.
I am, thank you, convener.
Come along, David.
Thank you. This report is against our local performance, against our local plan 2018, from the 1st April 2020 to the 31st of March this year. Hopefully you've all had a chance to go through the report, so I'll just briefly summarise and then open up for any questions. If we take you to the summary page, you see against our summary, against our objectives or indicators, that there are two, unfortunately, that are marked as red, and that indicates that they're 10% higher than the previous year-to-date period, or the local target wasn't achieved. So I'll concentrate on those. And there were specifically accidental dwelling fire casualties and all deliberate fires. So I would just take you to the all accidental fire casualties, just to give you the facts and figures there. Our target is to try and reduce that by 3% per year. And the year-to-date chart shows there's been an increase of 3 casualties when compared to quarter 3 and 4 of the previous year, and a decrease of 2 casualties when compared to the previous reporting period, which was quarter 1 and 2. Over the trend line of the million population trend line, it shows that Falkirk area is below Scotland and a comparator local authority for these figures. And just taking you on to deliberate fires, and here our target is to reduce these by 5% per year. And unfortunately there was an increase of 54 incidents compared to quarter 3 and 4 last year, and a decrease of 13 incidents compared to the previous reporting period, which is quarter 1 and 2 for last year. And again, in the trend line over the past 5 years, it shows Falkirk Council area to be similar to Scotland and lower than a comparator local authority. So with that, in particular, deliberate fires, there will be numerous contributory factors to this, none which of least is COVID, potentially for behaviours. However, we've got our teams, we've got our local community action teams and our local authority liaison officers that are working in conjunction with our partners, schools and local partnerships to try and educate and bring down these instances wherever possible. Convener, I can cover the rest in detail if required, However, I'd just like to point out under the unwanted fire alarm signals that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service concluded on the 11th of October a public consultation on this, which had 3 options. We've now gathered that information and be able to put that in a report which is due to come out on the 16th of December, on which we'll report on what the public chose as their main priority. And that concludes my very brief overview, and I'll happily open up to any questions.
Thanks,
Thanks,
David.
Convener.
Any questions to David? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, convener. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Councillor.
Going on, you were saying, David, about the schools. One of my wards is Bonnybridge, and we went through a wee spell of antisocial behaviour with fires, etc. See the schools, David. Do you pick them, or are they picked for you because, for example, Bonnybridge, the kids go to such and such a school? Do you target that, or how do you work that out, and how often do you visit a school with them to talk about deliberate fires and antisocial behaviour, etc.?
Thanks for that, Councillor. Just very briefly, and then I'll hand you over to my colleague Lynn, who specifically deals with this side of work within the area. However, we'll target the areas that are brought to our attention. If there are specific areas that are spiking, for example, then we'll deliberately target that, obviously with working in partnership with the school itself. So, Councillor, I'll just hand you over to Lynn just now. She might have a bit more detail for you.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you, Councillor, for the question. And hopefully I can maybe offer up a bit more information about the team that I am responsible for, and that looks on a daily basis to ensure, obviously from a response point of view, we reacted to the intelligence and information that comes in about incident activity. So very much in the context of the question about what schools do we visit, very much we target schools that are causing us the greatest concern, and we obviously learn about those schools through the partnerships that we have through Community Safety Partnership and also the task and coordination group elements. So for us, a lot of our engagement is really intelligence led regarding the information, particularly to do with antisocial behaviour through Police Scotland and our partnership. So we target based on that primarily. We do have wider education materials that do reach the entire education sector, and they're presented on the GLOW platform. We've relied heavily in this reporting period for the digital engagement through schools because of the way that we've been able to or not been able to work through physical engagement. So an extension to that is that where we have specific high risk or high tariff individuals presenting, we do, and we have done through a risk basis, been able to offer up kind of one-to-one programs. That has maintained where we've found where there is specific high risk individuals, we've been able to offer up that face-to-face engagement. So hopefully that's given you a wider context of some of that, how we approach the sort of youth engagement and the school's choices.
Thank you, Lynn. Very thorough. Can I come back to you, David? I've just got 2 more questions for you. This is one I bring up all the time with regards to the fire alarm smoke detectors change in February. As you know, it says at the top of page 46 that the Scottish Government have provided the Fire and Rescue Service, Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, with a limited number of most vulnerable people. Have you identified the vulnerable people, David, for these new smoke alarms and smoke detectors?
Yes, we have started that, Councillor, and continue to do so to identify them via referral pathways as well, and obviously with our own home fire safety visits. So that is a criteria that is set by the Scottish Government, and we actively pursue that and address the high risk, those that are identified as high risk, and then fit the interlinked alarms as per the new guidance that's due, or legislation, sorry, that's due to come out in February.
Thank you. Last question, David. Bottom of page 49, once again, it's one I've asked, I think, for the last four years. It's out of hospital cardiac arrest. The very first year I sat in one of these meetings, David, from the Fire and Rescue Service, it was going to be part of the wage structure, whether the fire service was going to provide this service of out of hospital cardiac arrest, and that was 4 years ago. I see now the wording is it's been paused. Could you give us an update on that, please?
Certainly, Councillor. Just to take you back to this time last year, the Chief Fire Officer put forward a expansion of the role and put an offer in to the Fire Brigade Union. Unfortunately, that offer was rejected, and that included out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So hence it's been paused at the moment. However, I can say that we still respond to incidents and to assist our partner agencies. So where and if that arises, we continue to do so. We're just not specifically mobilised for that on our own, but we continue to assist our partner agencies.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Convener.
That's Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor Grant. Any other councillor got a question? Councillor McCluskey.
Thanks, Convener. It's about Appendix 2 about the deliberate fires. Obviously, the Braes is one area in the 5 year that has doubled, from what it was 5 years ago, the number of fires. But amazingly to me, it's no over at this end of the world where you've got a lot of forests and peat and that it sometimes goes in fires and people set fire. But I was reported a lot of the instances was over at the White Cross area, and it was brought to my attention by a member of the fire brigade after the last meeting, and it seems there are a lot of use. There was an old pub burnt down there before, it went fire. And but the ground back of that, we've had a lot of fire raising up there by use. And I do know, I pointed that to the police to see if they were going to work and support that. In your report here is very positive about the efforts you make, like Lynn has said, with the schools and working with locally based peace officers. But I wonder if I could expand more on that. Are we getting the support for the police? Because obviously the fire brigade's the one we call on to deal with it, but the issues, and it didn't get mentioned with Sacro earlier on when the previous debate, for example. But if we find out who's doing the fire raising, because we do know that if people start fire raising, they have a tendency to go and do it. So do we put them to Sacro and try to get them to get out of that? How do we find out which schools or age group that's causing that? If we have managed to find out who it is. And the one way wheelie bins has always been a problem with, because they seem to burn well once they catch. But is there anything we can do to change the material or something in the wheelie bins that they didn't set fire as easily, or that, and be seen as a thing for use to set ablaze? So that's just the two lines of thought in relation to Appendix 2. Convener, if somebody could expand on my questions.
Certainly, Councillor, happily come in on that. So with your first point, yes, we actively work with the police. So they'll update us and we will likewise update them, and we'll also use partner referrals, for example, into Sacro and other agencies and any other local groups that report to us. We will certainly report into the police, and obviously they will then use their powers to try and identify the culprits, identify the schools that they attend, for example, and then we could help with our education programme to go in and target those specific schools or classes in cases that, and like Lynn mentioned earlier, and where it's necessary and deemed appropriate, we'll do one-to-one programmes with individual offenders in that case. As for the wheelie bins and deliberate fire setting, you're exactly right, Councillor. Wheelie bins do tend to be targeted on occasion, so we use our education programme when we're going out doing home fire safety visits and such like in the community to remind occupiers when they're putting out wheelie bins to do it, just before they're due to be picked up and to bring them back in. Unfortunately, it's normally the contents of the wheelie bins that are set alight, and obviously that then melts the plastic that they're contained in. So I don't think, certainly we don't have any scope for amending the materials that are used, but we certainly report in all the instances that's done. So I hope that helps, Councillor, but happy to expand further if you need anything
No,
more.
it certainly helps, and it just goes to show you the amount of work that you do in trying to prevent fires, not just putting them out. And I think that should be put out there and advertised more, and pressing that to show you the dual cooperation with departments and trying to deal with these issues. I know a lot of people have been angry over the COVID period and maybe more likely to fire raise and things, but obviously it's great to get your response. Thank you.
No, thanks, Councillor. And just to add, if you don't mind, Convener, I think with this report covering that specific period of time, when we had the further lockdown last Christmas, I think you're exactly right, Councillor, that there was probably a bit of kickback with some groups of youths when they eventually the lockdown was eased again when they got out. So there might have been a bit of frustration vented once they got out during this particular period of time. Thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Convener.
Are you, Councillor McCluskey? Councillor McCluskey, we're not hearing you very well. I don't know if your mic's tipped up again. Okay. Councillor Balfour.
Thanks, Convener. Just a couple of quick questions. Vehicle fires. I was just wondering if you've got any information on that, as in deliberate vehicle fires.
Councillor, for this particular period, for deliberate fires, certainly, if you just bear with me, Plonny, when I go to the area of the report. Excuse me. There wasn't anything specifically that was concerning us with vehicle fires as such, but obviously we report on that, and the majority of the deliberate fires that we attended were involving woodlands, forests, grasslands, crops, and outdoor sheds. So we didn't have any particular problems in that particular period with vehicle fires that I'm aware of, certainly, Councillor.
Okay. Just one other question. You see in the media now and again about when the fire service turns up to do their thing, there's attacks on the personnel. How's that been in the last while? Has it been any worse? Or
No, I'm glad to report that certainly the bonfire period just passed, and last year there had been a reduction within the Falkirk area of previous years. And we continue to work with the police, and try and do the education piece when we're going into schools, to highlight, we're there to assist them. We're not there to block or curtail anyone's fun when it comes to bonfires, but we're there to make sure community safety is kept in place. So I'm glad to report that there was, and Lynn, please step in and correct me, there was no physical attacks within the Falkirk area. There was one case of verbal abuse and on bonfire night, but that was it. So I'm glad to report that that is a great reduction from previous years.
Okay. That's me. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks, Councillor.
Any other questions? David, I have a quick question. It's about the linked up fire alarms and carbon monoxide alarm. Previous years, you could contact your local fire department to come out and install the alarms. But I'd installed them in my house and they come out in a big shiny fire engine, which surprised me, but they did. And I know your Scottish Government have given you some funding for high risk occupancies, but who's going to police the rest of the households? Because it's an added expense to households, in particular in this current climate. You're talking about £200 to £500 to these alarms installed in the house. So what kind of police is going to? Are you involved in policing these households that turn up and don't install the alarms? Or how will it be policed? How will it be monitored?
Yeah, Councillor, that's a very good question. As you're more than aware, the legislation is enacted in February next year, but it's primarily down to the occupier or owner of the responsibility to conform to legislation. So I think a lot of the fears that we've been fielding or questions we've been fielding is regarding household insurance. So no one's going to police that as such. That will be legislative, but if your household insurance asks if you meet the current legislation, and you tick yes, and then you subsequently have an incident and it's found not to, then that will affect your household insurance. But as for policing, we will continue to conduct home fire safety visits. We'll continue to do our risk assessment, and if they meet the criteria, then we'll fit to the new standard. If individuals don't have smoke alarms or don't have working smoke alarms, we'll continue to fit the single point ones, but that's not to legislative requirements after February 22, but we'll continue to do that as a stopgap until the owner occupier are able to then put in the interlinked alarms.
Thank you for that. Councillor McCluskey.
Just seeing you raised that, I had constituents come to me that obviously had the fire alarms all renewed in some of the houses, but when they went into the house, they found a gas. What they were saying was some were fire alarms and they found gas alarms, which is strange in Slamanan because we've no got gas. So I just find that was a strange thing for some official to come. So because obviously they're not going to do any good, you know, if you've not got gas to leak. And people were thinking that was a gas alarm. So how could that have happened years ago?
McCluskey, you've been shouting for gas for that long there. They're probably anticipating you could get it and put them in advance.
That's probably it.
David, you want to answer that or not?
Aye, that's probably it. But I'm just finding it strange how somebody could hear a gas alarm, think it's a fire alarm, and as I says. So maybe.
Councillor, I can maybe come in there. It may be a case that smoke alarms have been fitted, as should be the case. The new legislation indicates that a heat alarm should be installed within the kitchen area of premises, and smoke alarms within hallways and rooms that are, for example, your living room, the main use room in your building, and also carbon monoxide detectors for any carbon fueled device that you have in house. So it's not just if you've got gas, it would also be for boilers, heating boilers, and whether you have a flue or a fire in your house. So that's where the carbon monoxide detector may have been fitted, Councillor. I hope that.
Thank you. That would explain it. For years ago, before they went to expensive electric, it was a coal fire. So maybe they've been in for years. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Any other questions? Okay, can I take you to page 30 and the recommendations? Approve the report and acknowledge progress by the organisation meeting its priorities. We haven't requested for any further information and we haven't requested any follow-up report. So agree the recommendation?
Agreed.
Agreed.
David, thank you very much for that, your contribution.
Thank you, Convener. And please excuse me just very quickly, this report was based on our previous local fire and rescue plan. The new 2021 local fire and rescue plan was agreed earlier in the year by the Falkirk Council. So the next reporting period will be against the new plan in a year's time, or in August next year. So thank you very much, Convener. Thank you, councillors.
David, thank you. Okay, that takes us to agenda item 6, following the public bound service to children and young people. Robert, I believe you're giving us an overview of that one.
Thank you, Convener. This a report that sets out various different services that are commissioned by Children's Services. The report asks at section 2, the recommendations is to reprove the report and request further updates a year from now. You'll see within the report that it covers the national policy context, which is set out at section 4, getting it right for every child, the GIRFEC agenda, the early years framework, which covers the rollout of the ELC expansion that we report to the Education, Children and Young People Committee on a regular basis. Detail of the Integrated Children's Service Plan, which is a component part of the Community Planning Partnership overall plan, which is a plan for the various inputs and actions and activities to support children across the Falkirk area. A section which members are probably by now well familiar with on the Closer to Home Transformational Change project, which is aiming to rebalance the balance of care that we have for children who are looked after. At section 5.1, there's a table indicating the various organisations that are funded, setting out the funding they received in 2019-20, and then in the following year. And at the end of the report, there are individual reports on the performance and the activities delivered by Aberlor, Bernardo's, Homestart, CAMS, and so on through the rest of the appendices. And there are officers here who prepared those reports that will be able to answer questions on any of the appendices. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks, Robert. Gail, I want to go through each appendix one by one, and if there are any questions from the councillors, just put your hand up and we'll get questions asked and see if we can get them answered. Appendix 1, Aberlor. Any questions on Aberlor? Councillor McCluskey, you your hand up?
Sorry, Convener. It was just when I looked through it and it says staff work outreach within the family homes, and you know, none of the Brazies mentioned in all the communities, but then later on it says, it's just an explanation where it states that some three families in Avonbridge, one in Bowness, one in Wallstone, families out with the catch area where alternative support could not be sourced. So could you explain what does that mean? When it says it couldn't be sourced, does that mean that they've came in but didn't get done, or they were done even though they were out with the other areas? So I wonder if you could expand on that. That's page 64.
Kathy McGarry's on the call, so maybe she can provide the detail of that, Councillor.
Kathy, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Yes, you're right to pick that up. We do have provision that covers the Braes more specifically via further on in the report. There's the report on the Maddiston Family Centre. So we do have a position across all our contracted family support providers where they have particular areas where they're local to, that they provide the majority of their support, but where there are children and families requiring support in other areas where specific things aren't provided by their local provider, they will reach over and provide them elsewhere. So we shouldn't have gaps. We shouldn't have a kind of postcode lottery, even though families tend to favour their local provider. That's where they have their trusted relationships with the family support staff. But we do have that flexibility to be able to provide services across the whole of the Falkirk area. If that makes sense.
And as a link through social worker, how does these families get identified?
Yes, they take referrals from social work largely, but also from health colleagues and education colleagues. We would tend to make a referral via a team around the child meeting. It will be a multi-agency meeting. So it might be that a particularly young child is identified by, first of all, by the health visitor or even the midwife, or a family may be identified, pre-birth as needing additional support. And then there'd be a multi-agency meeting that wouldn't always involve social work, but often would, and a referral would be then signposted to the most appropriate agency.
Right, it's just that we've all got in our wards families who continue to give us concern about the child's safety and monitoring, because you get toddlers and nappies, you know, where you get 20 inquiries, for example, come in that toddler and nappies are walking up and down a main road, you know, that the mother's lying sleeping or whatever in the house, and the door's left open and the Wayne's walking about, this sort of thing. So it was just to try to find the difference in some of these groups and where should that kind of support to these families and monitoring be coming from. Is it something like Aberlor, or is it a different part of social work, or is it?
Well, a concern like that you describe would really come under the child protection concern if it was a toddler wandering about without supervision and support. So that would come in by whoever saw it, whether that's a member of the public or anybody else, into our initial response team, which is a new team that isn't mentioned in the reports because it's an in-house service that's been developed since June last year. And sorry, June this year. It's newer than I thought. And that is our kind of one-stop shop for all concerns of child protection and child welfare nature. So then there's this a very quick response across the whole of the Falkirk area to any of those kind of concerns. It might be that the situation that you're describing, that family probably would need ongoing support, and so there would be probably there would be a multi-agency meeting in those circumstances to decide who would be best placed to provide that support alongside social work.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? Cathy, can I ask a quick question on the pandemic and what pressure it's put on your funding and indeed the service to your clients?
Yes, the pandemic has, of course, had a massive impact on the families who were already struggling for various reasons, and I don't need to describe, you know, how difficult that has been for everybody. Has had an impact also on service delivery. So the kind of normal ways of providing support had to be paused pretty quickly. Our Aberlor colleagues were very good at that. They managed to source tablets and various kind of ways of reaching out to people remotely. They were also doing garden visits, using, you know, other means to engage with families more creatively. And you'll see from the papers, and it's referenced in both the Aberlor and the Bernardo's paper that follows it, the Falkirk Family Support Line that really came out of the pandemic, and the need that we were seeing and that we were anticipating for families to have somebody to talk to, somebody to reach out to. And because we had the good established relationships with both Aberlor and Bernardo's, we were able to ask them to kind of realign some of the funding and the resource, because they weren't using it in the normal way, to set up the Falkirk Family Support Line really pretty quickly and responsively. And that really ran through both of the lockdowns. And it's no longer running because services have become more online than they were as we recover from the pandemic, hopefully. But we did have that in place quickly as a response and as a flexible response to that need. But I think that, to be fair, that the impact of COVID, difficult to anticipate, but I think we'll be seeing that for a long time in terms of families requiring support.
Thanks for that, Cathy. Any other questions on this Appendix 1? No, thanks, Cathy. It takes us to Appendix 2, which is the Aberlor Family Support Centre in Langley. Again, are there any questions on that one? Councillor Grant.
Just convener, thank you. Why specifically Langley's? That could be answered, please.
I think that's probably quite a historic arrangement, that the family centre has been in Langley's, an area of a fairly high need over a long period of time. They cover Langley's, Bainsford and the New Carron area principally, but again, as in the other service, they will provide service and support to families living elsewhere. Again, because of where they're situated, it's easier for families to access their resources as a bricks and mortar building in the local area. But my understanding is that that was an arrangement, a property that has been provided by Falkirk Council right in the heart of the community, where there is a high level of need, but they do offer kind of outreach as well.
Thanks, Kathy. I kind of read it. If I didn't come for Langley's, I couldn't go near it. Do you know what I mean?
No, you'd be welcome.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Convener.
I think I ask a quick question on page 73, assessment of performance. Number 1, it says the service was expected to support 45 families. And then it goes on to say of the 77 families that were supported. So how can you measure you're only expected to support 45 families and then you get 77?
Well, it's the 45 families is what's stated in the joint working agreement. So what we had set out as an expectation at the beginning of the year, and they have exceeded that. And that is in part because of the different flexible ways of working. We did kind of get feedback from our third sector colleagues that because of the necessities of working remotely, that they have been able to in some ways be more efficient. Some families quite like that, telephone contact or Zoom calls and things. Some families absolutely need support workers in the house beside them, but it's not one size fits all. So they have been able to kind of reach out probably further than they may have done otherwise.
Okay, thank you for that, Kathy. That's sounding positive.
Yeah.
Any other questions on Langley's? No. Takes us Appendix 3. Again, you're involved in again, Kathy, I see Bernardo's. Any
Yes.
questions on
Oh,
Bernardo's?
sorry.
No questions? Okay. That will take us to Appendix 4, Homestart Falkirk. Any questions on Homestart Falkirk? Could I ask a question on page 90? It's how staff are reasonably trained in VIG and have begun delivering this to parents. What is VIG?
You've got me there. That's just popped out of my head. I can't remember. Apologies. I'll find that out. That I've just got a blank on that. I don't know whether. Oh, we've got a hand up.
Yeah, email it round or to Robert, you can pass it around.
I think my colleague Laura is saying that she can remember what VIG is.
Hi there. It stands for Video Interactive Guidance Training, and it is an intervention that can be used to work alongside families to visually be able to share with them behaviours and what works really well and what could do with a little bit of improvement. And it can be used to kind of measure improvement in things that you can actually visually share with families, what is and what isn't working, and really engage them in how they can look at improving some specific relationship-based behaviours.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that.
Okay,
Any other questions? No. Okay, that takes us to Appendix 5, National Health Service, Forth Valley CAMS. Any questions on that? Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Kathy. I don't know if this is a question for you or a question for Robert, or maybe I'm just reading it wrong. Page 100, it says that the service is located within NHS Forth Valley. CAMS provide a specialist service for children and young people across Forth Valley with mental disorder or symptoms of psychological distress. Then it says that CAMS do not provide a specialist health service for looked after children. So I take it this is where you guys come in. Where I'm confused. Are we paying for a service that then hinders the CAMS, and why do they not provide a service for looked after children? Because if somebody makes an appointment for CAMS, they go to the doctor refers them to CAMS in Forth Valley. they can wait for anything up to 26 weeks or whatever for an appointment. Whereas the one that we are paying for, it's not detrimental to your service. I wish it was all like that. These looked after children can then be taken right away. If they miss an appointment, that doesn't matter. We'll reschedule it. So it just seems unfair on, is it our service that is wrong? If that makes any sense.
Hi, sorry, I'll just come in if that's okay. I had prepared the report. Yes, we do. It is a specifically targeted service for our looked after population, and that is due to them having the highest level of needs, and they absolutely need something different from what CAMHS can offer in terms of that flexibility, responsiveness, stickability. So we do know that CAMHS have got referral criteria, they've got long waiting lists, and they do often, it's a clinic-based service model. So if young people are not feeling able to go to clinics or don't attend appointments, they're then often removed from the service. One of the other things that's good about it is that if children move out of Falkirk, but they're still Falkirk's children, so they're in care placements externally, that our clinical psychologists will reach out to them and offer services to them. So it is a specialist service, and CAMHS don't offer that. And yet I agree, ideally CAMHS would offer that, and they would offer a responsive, supportive, quick service to any young person that needed it. But CAMHS are not in a position to do that, and it is a real gap for a really vulnerable group of young people. So we have chosen to commission that service for our looked after population.
Thanks, Gail. I do get that. I honestly do. And as I said, it is all good. He's provided a great service. I just think that Falkirk Council or others will need to look at the other side of CAMHS, because there is children who have got severe mental needs, but they're not looked after children, and they're waiting weeks and weeks and weeks and months. That's all, Gail. Thanks.
Councillor McCloskey.
Convener, I'd like to share the views of my colleague there. Very well put. We've got doctors now saying that something like it's 18 months or something to go to CAMHS. There's no point in them going to CAMHS because there's such a delay. So the doctors are no referring them, and because the waiting lists are that big, they're typically using, and I think this needs to be brought back to, they're being referred to the counsellors that got started by the Scottish Government in the schools. We've not had an update how that's working. We're telling it's 6 weeks therapy for folks self-harming and a whole host of things, and then it gets reviewed and that. And there's bad liaison between the doctors, because they've got to ask permission for obviously the counsellor in the school to get the pupils' permission to get what the counsellors doing to help them, because there seems to be a gap there and no linking collectively. I know it's a new service, but I'm troubled with all these things. I'm troubled that somebody with a mental health need is waiting that length of time. I'm troubled in the fact that we're trying to fill the gap sometimes, and are we funding that gap? How's it working? And also a local inquiry I done just the other day where education's supporting a family where a child has severe support needs and can't communicate and other issues, and yet we've got a therapist and the head teacher saying try to go to CAMHS, and then was refused. So we've got education now try to support the family to appeal. But these all seem strange to me, that if there's people need support out here and we see all these different services that getting it right for every child and supporting services, how it doesn't seem to work. And if we as elected members can't understand it or can't try to resolve it, then it's sad, because we're the voice of the people. So I would just add the points, Convener.
Councillor Aitchison.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I see on page 99 it states throughout the last financial year the psychologist worked with 112 young people. This is 43 more children and young people than the year before. Can I ask how much more capacity can the service take? And given that they've worked with 43 more than the year before, are the people who are requiring the service getting the attention that they really need? And how stretched is that given the clinical staff? Thank you.
Yeah, the numbers are different this year because last year, I've noted in my report, we were operating with 50% staffing, so we had only 0.5 of a psychologist for that year. So it's because we've increased the service. So we always had funding for a full psychologist, but half post left, so it took us some time to recruit. So the numbers were less because the staffing was less during that time. So since we've been able to increase the staffing, we've been able to deliver more services. And as you can see, the number of consultations, professional consultations, also markedly increased from 174 to 324. I think that what's also helped with service delivery in some respects is because of the pandemic, we've had to do things a bit differently. So we have still offered face-to-face contact, but there have been video calls and professional consultations have been online that's then freed up a bit of capacity to do more of some of that stuff. So I think it's a combination of the remote working where that's appropriate and the increased psychology support to take on higher numbers. In terms of where we are, at the moment, we don't have a waiting list, and psychologists try and be really responsive and flexible when referrals come in terms of prioritisation. So they may reduce the level of contact with somebody if things are going well, and they may offer a higher level of contact if a young person's in crisis. But the numbers, I would say, are fairly high, given that we only actually have one full-time equivalent clinical psychologist. There is definitely a lot of need around.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Gail.
Any other questions? Gail, just quickly, and you touched on it there about the face-to-face and moving to video calls. I thought under the circumstances these youngsters are in, face-to-face would be obviously more important. The pandemic has caused problems here. How successful were the video calls? Or is it just a stopgap?
Yeah, so there was still 102 face-to-face contacts during the pandemic, but some of it was face-to-face and some of it it's in consultation with the young person. So it might have been a face-to-face and then the next time it was online. So it depends on the individual needs of the young person as to whether it would be face-to-face or online. I do think that face-to-face would be the best, absolutely. For any therapeutic intervention, that would be the most appropriate way to do that. But at the height of the pandemic, obviously we were very restricted in what we can do. So it's been an alternative. Most young people have engaged with it. I'd say the engagement's probably been a bit less in terms of the quality and depth of that than it would have been face-to-face, but the service has been consistent in terms of their availability for young people in need.
Thanks for that, Gail. Any further questions? Okay, thanks, Gail. Takes us to Appendix 6, which is in NHS Forth Valley Speech and Language Therapy. Any questions on that? Councillor McLaughlin.
It's the paper said that something like 53% of the funding comes from the health board and we supply the other 40%. How did we get to that percentage? Because speech it should be to me it's a health thing and health should be providing it. So how did we work out that percentage, and has it always been that percentage? So if you could try to explain to us, because we know that people who have an issue with their speech and that, it can set them back really, considerably in their development and confidence and prospects.
You go, Kerry. You're on mute, Kerry, I think.
Apologies, I should know better.
problem.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor McCluskey, actually, for your question. That's a really good question that we have asked many times. So the reason that it's a joint funding is because the impact that happens on the young people is to do with, first of all, the clinical support from the speech and language therapy service, who support children to overcome their barriers to language communications, which has a massive impact on their future outcomes and allows their needs to be met. But the biggest place for language barriers to exist is in a school, so our school staff need to be upskilled in exactly the right kind of training, expertise and knowledge about every single child who is supported not just by speech and language, because the work that they do with the schools supports children who are not direct cases for speech and language. So it's jointly funded because the work is taking place in our schools, and it is for our school staff as well as for our young people and our families. So at the moment it's usually a 55-45% split, but it's currently 57 from the NHS and 43% for education, but it is because it is a service that has actually been changed. So the NHS previously, the service was delivered through clinics, but now all the services are delivered in our schools. So it's actually a really efficient model, and it's actually making a bigger impact on more of our young people in our schools. And if we didn't fund the NHS, we would have to fund very bespoke private training facilities. We need to buy trainers in. And it's a much more efficient model to have our allied health professionals who have the most up-to-date access to skills, research, professional knowledge, who are in our schools every day, who can really create bespoke packages for our children and our staff in that school to maximise that support. So that's why we dovetail that joint funding to achieve that. That answers your question.
It does. I also see earlier intervention being operational in some of my local schools, where very young children have been found to be needing that support and getting it. So it seems to be at an earlier stage now, which is obviously of great advantage to the young people when as they mature. So I thank you for that, and I do see progress in this area. Thank you.
Thank
you. Anybody else got a question? Did I ask a quick question? Page 109, number 2, and it's on about the 30% of the requests were from education staff. And I could only say that education staff can direct parents to self-request. I'm trying to work out what the difference between education doing a direct request and then saying and encouraging parents to do it. Why did education just do it completely themselves?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So I think it's because the model previously used to be that parents would make a request, and because there wasn't, and schools were making questions of their link psychologists, because there was a dedicated phone line, so schools could phone, but they couldn't then discuss an individual case. They could talk around it, but from that kind of personal and confidential nature, they couldn't specifically talk about a case unless the parent had given them permission. And at that stage, when that model first existed, there was a clinical model. So we've moved away from that model in 2019. So more and more schools are working with their families and making that direct contact. So families can make it all the time, and they're trying to create that open door model. And the fact that they're in schools are trying to break down those barriers between staff being able to ask those questions. But if it's about a specific case that might need one-to-one work and assessment, they would need to be permission from the parent for education to make that request. So sometimes parents were making the decision to refer themselves.
Okay, thanks for that explanation, Kerry. Any other questions? Thanks, Kerry. That takes us to Appendix 7, One Parent Families Scotland. Are there any questions on that? No. Okay, Appendix 8, Couriers. Are there any questions on Courier?
Hello, I can take any questions. Sorry.
I don't know if there is any question on Couriers. No. Okay, Appendix 9, Transform Forth Valley. Any questions on Transform Forth Valley? I have a quick question, page 141. To how many people directly benefit from the organisation? 92% of appointments offered were attended. I take it the other 8% just didn't turn up. Is that the explanation? I don't know.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to come in on that. Yes, I suspect what you're proposing is probably as accurate as we understand. So 92% of people took up appointments, and those appointments offered 8% people failed to follow through an appointment. Just as others have described during the COVID period, as is indicated in the report, there has been a blended model of both face-to-face contact and also contact through Zoom and another medium for families, some depending on the needs of the families. So 92% take-up rate is I think a reasonable position for the service to have, tried to support engagement as best they could.
82%, very high return, I would think, yeah. Any other questions? Okay, Appendix 10, Who Cares Scotland? Are there any questions on Who Cares Scotland? If not, we'll take us back to the recommendations. On page 55, approve the report and acknowledge progress by the external providers in meeting the Council's priorities. I don't know if I've requested further information or requested any actions which follow up. Do I agree with the recommendations? Agreed. Takes us to agenda item 7, following the public pound poverty and inequalities. I think it's Sally Buchanan is going to run us through that one. Sally.
Hi there. Good afternoon, or good morning, everybody. Sorry, a bit ahead of myself there. Just bear with me. That's fine. Yes. Good morning, everyone. So today, the report in front of you is reporting against 4 organisations that we fund in order to deliver against our requirements within the Community Planning Partnership and Council objectives around addressing poverty and inequality. For the period that we are looking at just now, given it is the 1st of April 2020 to March 2021, they are reporting against our SOLD. However, obviously going forward, these organisations would be working towards the objectives of our Falkirk plan, where poverty is a key theme as well. So they will be working towards the Falkirk plan objectives. So these 4 organisations are monitored under our following the public pound arrangements, and the amounts that go to each individual organisation are detailed in section 3.5 of the report. I'm delighted to say that the monitoring officers for each of these organisations are here with me today. So I myself monitor the Citizens Advice Bureaus, but we also have Mark Meakin for LGBT Youth Scotland, we've got George Paul for Macmillan Money Matters, and we've got Ewan McWilliams around the Armed Services project that we fund at Denny Cab. So they should be able to answer any questions that you might have. As I mentioned, the period that this report covers is April 2020 to March 2021, which obviously includes the height of the pandemic and associated lockdowns. All the organisations reported on today had to rapidly adapt their services to make sure that people were supported, and they're still working with that ongoing challenge today. So with that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions or pull upon my colleagues to help me with that as well. So happy to hand back.
Thanks, Sally. Before I go on, Robert, I don't know if the people for the last agenda are still there, but could I thank them for their contribution? I should have done that before I moved on. Apologies. We do the same as we did the last time, go through the appendices. And if there are any questions, Appendix 1, LGBT Youth Scotland, does anybody got any questions on that for Mark Meakin? Could I ask a question on the page 165, list of agreed outcomes and opportunities to gain accreditations? Could I maybe an explanation of what these accreditations are?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, accreditations relate to, for example, Duke of Edinburgh Awards. They can do sectional awards during that about skills, knowledge that they've gained on that would enable them to do that. Youth Achievement Awards, Saltire Awards, there's a whole range of awards that a young person can do, but it's done on a voluntary basis with support from staff based within LGBT Youth Scotland as well.
Thanks, Mark. Page 166, LGBT Scotland Youth has been part funded by Falkirk Council for 1 year, and it says underneath the council agreed to continue funding 17, 18. Is this, we've only been funding it for 1 year, but that doesn't impression I get if it's below that.
No, sorry, Convener, yes, we've funded that since 2016/17. Yeah. And however, it's funded on an annual basis rather than a 3-year basis. It's funded on a yearly basis, and that's agreed at the time of the council budget. When the council budget's agreed, that's how we know what level of funding we can offer LGBTG, and that's not any different from any other organisation that the council funds, certainly for equalities work and community development work as well.
Thanks, Mark. Any other questions? Okay, it takes us to Appendix 2, Denny Place, Falkirk and Greensmouth and Bowness Citizens Advice Bureau. Are there any questions on these? Councillor McCluskey.
The only question I've got is in some of the figures set out in page 177, and it just seems strange sometimes that, you know, we've got 3 different bureaus working separately, and some of their contacts, you know, numbers are strangely higher than others, and how much benefit gains came in is, you know, there are big gaps and differentials between that, and I see it's changed again last year with COVID. But and we've got comparative things there. But could somebody summarise some of that in more layman terms? Because it's hard to evaluate, you know, we can see that what ones are more busier, but strangely some of the other ones get maybe achieve more than that. So could we hear an overall view of that, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor McCluskey. I'll certainly try. So it is hard to compare exactly across them. They have different catchment area sizes and they receive different amounts of funding from us. So traditionally, the Falkirk Citizens Advice Bureau is generally our busiest, and that's reflected in the fact that it has the highest number of contacts. You're right that Grangemouth, however, has identified more issues that might reflect slightly different working practices, or it can reflect different needs of the people who come in. The difference between the contacts and issues is that one person will come in and that's a contact. However, through that discussion, you are often highlighting there's various issues. So, you know, they might require some welfare benefit support, but also some debt advice. That would count as 2 separate issues. Denny Citizens Advice Bureau is indeed our smallest and receives the smallest amount of funding from us. And again, their figures reflect that they are smaller. You are absolutely right, of course, that COVID impacted on these figures, which adds a further level of complexity to it. So the number of contacts decreased as the bureaus were indeed closed for some of that. However, in line with the other organisations that we've already heard about this morning, they did rapidly look to work to deliver services in different ways, putting up, you know, having telephone support available, supporting people via email where they can, and indeed have to introduce video call as well. So there are other services or other mechanisms available. They continue to work with those today. However, they have reopened their face-to-face service for those who really, really need it, but with considerable effort to triage as much as possible, so that face-to-face service is really reserved for clients that they cannot support in any other way. So that, you know, if they can support someone by email or telephone, they will do that in order to save that kind of face-to-face and reduce the risk to staff and volunteers.
I would like to say that they do fantastic work, and I've had the benefit of that. I went to them myself for help with a thing, and so as members of my family and many of my constituents. So I speak highly. But the other issue we'd like to bring up is number of new volunteers. Denny, we seem to have attracted 11 new volunteers in 1920 and 8 and to 2021, but we only got 4 in the Falkirk area and 1 in the Grangemouth area. I mean, we can only do these things with volunteers and the people and the training, and be able to pass on and help people who need that advice. So it just seems we didn't be doing really well getting volunteers and being active over in Denny, and yet the other 2 are more busier, but we didn't seem to be attracting the same level of people. So what is it we're doing in Denny that we can do in the other 2? Is my answer, because we need these people, and that's how we can answer that.
Thank you again for the question, and I'm not sure I've got an exact answer as to quite what Denny did that was different. I can certainly pick that up at the next meeting with them, which is, I actually have a meeting with them next week, and I can raise that. It could be various things. It could be that they had a particular campaign around volunteering in the area or something. It may be that they were actually looking for more volunteers due to turnover. Clearly, again, volunteering's been impacted by the pandemic, and it becomes harder to get. Whilst a lot of people have turned to volunteering during the pandemic, Citizens Advice Bureau might be a slightly harder thing to get people to volunteer for at the moment. But by way of reassurance around best practice between the 3 CABs, they very much do work together on areas like the movement of volunteers, campaigns, joint projects, and very much share good practice. So the meeting I have with them next week is with all 3 of the Citizens Advice Bureaus and Citizens Advice Scotland, and, you know, where there are issues, where there are opportunities to make improvements between the 3 of them, they very much share good practice and share working practices to make sure that improvements are across the 3. So they are working, whilst they are 3 individual organisations, there is a lot of cross-working and a lot of joint working.
No, thanks. I'm glad to hear that. It's just that Grangemouth's only got 12 active volunteers, where Falkirk's got 29 and Denny's now up to 25. You know, so I was just trying to see as a support to help the overall, even though they're different bureaus. So I'm glad to hear that, and thanks very much for the answers.
Thanks, convener. Just a quick question. I'm aware that the CAB has been working with other organisations. An example of that is From Me to You up in Falkirk. They've got one of their members, I think, goes up on a regular basis to give advice and support to people going in to see that other organisation. What other organisations are CAB working with in that way?
Certainly prior to COVID, all 3 Citizens Advice Bureaus regularly did outreach into a variety of locations and into, for example, places like health centres, other locations. Again, that is something that has been curtailed a bit with COVID, but I think is something that the timing is right to begin to look at bringing back out again. Indeed, the picture is similar for our own advice hubs, where our multi-skilled advisors used to do a lot more outreach work into other locations. Of course, as face-to-face services were restricted last year, all those kind of locations closed, and it became, you know, far more difficult to do that. But again, that is something that we're looking at rolling back out again just now. So I'm happy to pick that up with them at the joint working meeting next week, and specifically have a discussion as well as around volunteering, but on the outreach locations and where they are working, and make sure that we're getting that up and running again.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? Charlie, I've got a couple. On page 176, the 10 locations for outreach. How was that operated during COVID? Because I don't think they were open, were they? How do you reach the clients?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the pages there. So yes, those areas, I believe that was updated, but I need to double check. That might be that that was on a contact basis where they were getting referrals through rather than actually turning up in the locations. Certainly, I know that's the areas they had been working in before, and I will double check that and can confirm that one back again.
And page 178, the point 2, the bottom bullet point, face-to-face tribunals stopped. And you're going to say that they're causing backlogs. What kind of hardship has that caused people who haven't been able to go through their tribunals and get their cases sorted out? And how we help them out?
I'm wondering actually whether George might be better placed to answer that one than me. If George, if you don't mind me passing the buck, as I believe that will have impacted considerably on your own service, George. So you might be better placed to give a more accurate answer than me.
The tribunals have various options in terms of just paper hearings, but they've also started the video conference calls as well, and they've been working through some of that background, that backlog, so they are starting to catch up a bit, and they've actually started face-to-face tribunals again as well, so it should all pick up in time.
There's a backlog, no great hardship for those people who can't get their cases sorted out. How do they get funding? How do they live?
They will have a certain amount of benefits coming in while that appeal is outstanding. I know it's tight, but again, that's where the Scottish Welfare Fund can come in and help families who are in desperate need.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is just a comment on the case study on page 181. It just shows how your life can change so very, very quickly for individuals. You know, and it can happen to any of us. Any other questions on Appendix? Is Appendix 3, which is Danish Citizen Advice Bureau Armed Service Advice Project. Are there any questions on that? No. Okay, takes us to Appendix 4, partnership between Stirling, Falkirk Councils, NHS, Forth Valley and Macmillan Cancer Support. Are there any questions on that? Councillor McCluskey?
No questions. It's a great report and a great service, and it's drawing over £1,395,000 and benefits to the people who are suffering for that terrible disease. And you know, for so little funding that we put into this, what they're achieving and what Macmillan actually does as a whole, not just the people gain the support and money matters. You know, I mean, I just couldn't say enough about them. So I just like to say that, and I'm sure that's the view as all convener and the committee. You know, it's a terrible, frightening disease that affects everybody.
Any other questions?
No.
The other speaker ask a question on page 194, the assessment of performance. And obviously you've excelled yourself here. You're saying the projects to achieve 400 to 400 people. You're supported 450. How much further can you go under the current financials you have?
The project is only targeted with 400 each year for the money that's there. Obviously, they've gone above and beyond that. But again, it's in recognition that the majority of these people who are coming through are on a DS 1500, which means that death can be reasonably expected within a 6-month period. And in fact, you'll be aware that throughout the COVID, the NHS and GPs have been more focused in on COVID itself, and this has led to people with cancer not getting diagnosed as quickly as they might be. And one of the consequences of that is that some of them, had they had the treatment earlier, would not now be in a terminal stage. The certificates that come from the specialists and GPs mean that the claims can go through quicker and it's less work for the staff. And I think that's one of the reasons why they have managed to see more. But again, it's a real effort. And this year, one of the members of staff who was working within the team had to retire on ill health herself. And indeed, she died last month from cancer. So again, it's a reminder of just how it affects everyone.
Do you find yourselves that you have to turn anybody away?
We haven't as yet. But again, there is only so much that the team themselves can do. Stirling Council have been fairly good in raising extra funding for slightly different parts of the project, and they have other workers out with this project in the hospitals as well, seeing people. So again, that all helps.
Thank you for that. Any other questions on it? Okay, that takes us to the recommendations on page 159.
Was there one more?
Sorry.
Sorry.
I'm ahead of myself.
Forces cab.
No, done them all. No, I was right. We've completed them. To take the recommendations 2.1 on approve the report and acknowledge progress by external organisations in meeting council priorities. I don't think we've requested further information. I don't think we've requested a follow-up report, although we'll get them reports next year. Can I thank everyone for their contribution? And I think that closes the meeting. And again, thanks for all attendance.
Can I just say something?
Sorry.
Robert Naylor's got his hand up, and then could
Okay,
I? Sorry, Robert, I saw your hand up. If I can just maybe say that's the committee considered or completed its meeting cycle for 2021. There's no meeting scheduled for 2022, but I'm aware that we haven't yet considered the IGIB progress report, so we'll need to try and schedule a meeting just for that in January or February. So it's just to give you the good news that there's one more meeting. Thank you.